Hi, welcome to another episode of Start the Week with Wisdom. I'm your host, Bridget Burns with the University Innovation Alliance.
And I'm Doug Lederman, co-founder and editor of Inside Higher Ed.
Each week, Doug and I like to team up and have a conversation with a leader in the field that we think has wisdom that will be useful for you. Sometimes that's college presidents, chancellors, it's all kinds of folks. And today we have someone who's a distinguished longtime leader who we know has a lot of insight to share that will hopefully be inspiring. That's why we call it Start the Week with Wisdom. It's always upbeat on a Monday.
And we're program each week is brought to you by Mainstay, which some of you may still know or remember as AdmitHub. It's a student engagement and retention platform. It's proven it works through peer-reviewed research, which really distinguishes it from a lot of tech companies. It helped Georgia State reduce summer melt by about more than 20%. And it also, in another peer-reviewed study, showed how it helped Georgia State retain 1,200 students. You can check out Georgia State's work through Mainstay and more about Mainstay at mainstay.com.
And the Innovating Together podcast, which this is rebroadcast on, is sponsored by the Carnegie Corporation. So just wanting to thank them for their support. So today, very excited, bringing him on, drum roll. There he is. Welcome. Our guest is going to be Kevin Kruger from NASPA, who has been at NASPA for, is it 30 years? I feel like it's
30 years on July 1st, 30 years, yes.
And you are retiring then.
I am.
I feel like you're really like perfectly timed, and this has obviously been planned out for a very long time.
It has.
Well, Kevin, you've been a longtime friend to to us, but also just, I think, the field in general. You've, especially right now, folks are very mindful of the importance of national associations and their ability to convene and to share ideas and to help support the development of parts of the higher education sector. And boy, student affairs, professionals in the last few years, I'm sure have really appreciated NASPA. But I just wanted to understand for you, what, you've been in this job why would you give it up?
Well, two things. One is, and it sounds selfless. I don't mean it to be that way, but it's how I think about it. I have a great job. I think I have one of the best jobs in higher ed, in my opinion. There's others, but it's a great job. And I really think it's time for someone else to have a shot at it. Like I didn't want to clog it up for into my 70s. So, two, there's other things that I have interest in doing that are maybe a little more personal and self-fulfilling. And so I also wanted to carve some time out for that as well. Third, these kind of jobs take an enormous amount of attention, energy. And as you, move into a later part of your life, it gets harder. Like travel, for example. I mean, I travel 120 to 140 days a year. That is a grind. And maybe, sometimes I'm in the middle of an airport. I'm like, I'm too old for this. So I think, maybe it's time to think about it. So I've been thinking about it for a couple of years, wanted the timing to be right. It just so happened that the 30-year anniversary of my being at NASPA seemed like a good time to make this decision and to move in a direction. My wife is in the sports broadcasting business. She also retired this year. She works for CBS Sports. So we both kind of came into a sort of a soft landing and a chance to move on and do some other things.
That's great.
You can see me. I'm going to try and control I've been trying not to nod too much, but you and I are at quasi-similar stages of our professional lives, and I'm doing a fair bit of thinking along those same lines. What we were just talking about. There's a lot of talk about people who sort of fail retirement, as it were, and how fully are you going to be retiring professionally? Professionally?
Yeah, it's a good question. Yeah, one thing I will tell you, Doug, is that this is my personality. I went to school in retirement. Like every person that retired, I interviewed that I knew personally. I've read books. I've talked about, not the finance part of it, but the psychic part of it. Like how do you maintain who you are? And I've also talked to people who haven't just failed, but have struggled through retirement or were depressed about not having that sense of meaning, or they felt like they didn't know what to do with themselves. So I really gave a lot of thought to it. First thing is, I don't want another full-time gig. So I've had people, of course, who would know me over the years, in lots of different sectors say, hey, would you like to do this? Take over my organization, do this. I'm like, no, I already have a job. I don't need another job. Having said that, I am open to, and it's too early to kind of, talk about it in too much detail, but I do want to do something that keeps me intellectually engaged because I love this work and I love higher ed. So I have a work habit that I don't know if I've ever shared with the two of you that I've had for really for a long time, but definitely since I've been president. I get up in the morning, or I'm an early riser, and for the first 2 hours of the day, all I do is read. That's it. No email. And I read news aggregators. Obviously, I read Inside Higher Ed. I read, sometimes it's a book, sometimes it's a new report. And what I do then is think about two things. One is, how does this relate to the future and our work? So it may be a larger higher ed issue, but how does student affairs connect to that? And two, if I was going to talk about it, what would I say about it? And I literally create a slide right there for the data point or the thing that I'm going to use. I park it on a deck, and then when I'm getting ready to do a speech, I had a speech last week at University of Albany. Yeah, every week I do a speech. It's a different speech because I'm drawing from material that I gathered. My point of that story is not that's how I was successful as a CEO, but how do I stop that behavior? And do I want to stop that behavior? Do I want to continue it? And I kind of feel like I want to continue to have a voice and to have a place where I can express that, but not the responsibilities that come with being a CEO. Because that's what has worn me down. It's the supervision and the budgeting and the strategic planning and the travel and the pressure of keeping the ship running. And I'd like to step away from that, but still have a voice in some small ways.
Well, I think I can probably speak for the industry when I say hoorah, and that I think it'll be great to have. I mean, that's a really fascinating insight into. I think all of us would probably benefit from some kind of dedicated time like that. But also it would be nice to still have you around in whatever ways works for you. So
yeah. Well, just one addition to that. There are constraints about what I can say, not really, but to some degree. I have a board, I have members, and I have a profession. And yet, at the same time, after 45 years in higher ed, I also have a lot to say, some of which I can't say as the CEO. So I also am looking for some lanes where I can be a little bit more provocative than I have been before.
Well, that's great. I also was just thinking about, to have been in your role during COVID. That took a decade off, right? For many people, I think it took 5 to 10 years off their career life, just because it was so difficult.
Yeah, So imagine, in my world, and I imagine this row of spigots and these spigots are the flow of things, resources that allow the engine to run for my organization. And then in 1 hour, we turn them all off. And then we had to somehow think about how we're going to continue as an organization and still serve the profession. So and keep people employed, because more than anything else, no matter what I do and I'm responsible for 93 people and their dogs and their houses and their spouses and their cars and that's a huge responsibility that I think about every single day. So when COVID hit, what am I going to do? So that pressure every day, I was up, almost every night at 2 a.m. trying to problem solve, think, how do we pivot? How do we do something different? How do we serve our members' needs? How do we do it and don't charge them anything? We were free for almost 18 months. How do we help our members? And I'm going to tell you while there's no shortcut to that. I mean, there was obviously this sort of psychic impact on all of us who went through that. But what saved me were colleagues. I'm going to name two, if you don't mind, but John O'Brien from EDUCAUSE and Susan Johnson, from Nakubo, which was such a loss, of course. Three of us would meet weekly and just talk about what the challenge was. And we got ourselves through COVID by having that kind of support network, which is kind of a leadership lesson I would have for anybody. You have to have people that you can trust and rely on. And sometimes it's not your staff because they have self-interest that of course affects some of the judgment. I can't have conversations about letting people go with the very people who are supervised. It's just some places that you can't do that.
There are limits. There are limits on, I mean, we've talked about this a lot, but there are limits on how much a organizational leader can have friends, with the people who work for them, and it's really challenging. Yeah.
And I will tell you one last thing on COVID, just for me, I was really fortunate to have an extraordinary board chair, Denzel Sweet, who's the VP at University of Washington. So he ended up also being a counselor for me as we kind of, he was maneuvering his own stuff on campus, but thinking about how to move through that crisis. But Bridget, you're right. I mean, I think all of us who had responsibilities, senior responsibilities in that time, would say, whether it was, the college president or dean or, whatever, it took years off. I don't know if your life, it certainly felt like it was, extraordinarily different. And that probably accelerated my thinking about retirement, to be honest.
Yeah. Well, so I guess I can turn this to both of you. You both have been seeking out conversations with people, seeking recommendations and advice about retirement as you lead up to this. What lessons did you hear that for you really resonated that you would say our audience should know? That, like, you don't have to say who said it, but I'm just curious if there was a couple pieces that really were like, this is the good stuff. Would love to give you the chance to share.
Yeah, Kevin, why don't you go? Because I'm early in my journey. I'm probably going to come pick your brain because you've done more studying than I have. I'm early on. Go ahead.
Well, I think, it's for me, it's about passion. It's about, what excites you, what gets you up in the morning, what brings you joy, and finding and imagining what that might be without the responsibilities that you currently have. And so I think it's difficult for people to retire who don't have sort of an active interest in doing other things, and whether that might be for me, it's very personal. I mean, I have a beautiful Martin guitar sitting right over here that I haven't played in 15 years. I want to get back. I want to play the guitar. I want to learn how to fly fish. I live in Western North Carolina with beautiful. Those are two things. More time with my kids and my grandkids. Things that get cut off when you're doing the things you do. More time with my wife. People say, well, travel. And I can't remember the guy who talked about your encore career. I can't remember the guy's name, but he wrote a book about the encore career, and Ellen Babby was involved at one point. And I remember going to a presentation they said about people retiring. Like, you ask people, what do you want to do? I'm like, I want to travel. I'm like, okay, so 52 weeks of the year, you're going to travel for what, 2 weeks, 3 weeks? What are you going to do with the other 48 weeks? And so having that kind of sense of purpose, giving back to whatever matters to you, whether it be family or whatever. And then, for me, I think I'm fortunate to have some avenues to stay connected professionally, and to do that in a very nominal way, not a big way, but I think that kind of thing will keep me intellectually engaged and interested. I even thought about writing a book at one point. I'm like, you know what? I don't actually want that kind of work. So I'm like, I don't want to write a book.
Well, that's helpful. Thank you. And
Sure.
Doug, anything you would add on to that you've heard?
No, it's fascinating. I mean, it's interesting because it's I think when you get to a certain age, you are allowed to be a little selfish, and you can choose what to do. And probably for me, I'm thinking, and it sounds, you said something similar, Kevin, what not to do. Like, the stuff that you want to stop doing. We all of our jobs have tons of stuff, hopefully, that we love, and plenty of crap that we really don't. And so figuring out how to be able to do what you want to do. And again, I'm not I don't consider myself a selfish person, so I don't really think or talk like this very often, but like being able to really focus on what brings you some joy and some pleasure, and sort of discarding the stuff that's that we all know we have to do as anyway. So that's how I.
But let me just add another thing that I'm not sure about, because this is not all clear sailing, right? So my wife actually has said to me as I was getting ready to retire, she said, how are you not going to be the man? Now, if that's language for, like, right now, I mean, I am the voice of student affairs. I run the largest professional student affairs association in the world, not by myself, with a group of people, but, I have that role. Every day I make decisions, some of them small, some of them big. I get in front of a stage. Sometimes it's 6,000 people at my conference. Last week it was 200 at the university. I mean, there's a lot of buzz that comes with that. You try to keep some humility in all of it, but like, you get a lot of accolades. So that switch gets turned off on July 1st. So I don't know. And it's a good question that you could ask, like, how are you not going to be, can you, without the buzz, what's your day going to be like? And right now it seems joyful and glorious, but I think you'd have to, it'd be worth, not with this interview, but like, ask me in 6 months or a year. It's like, how's that gone? How's that been not being in charge? Because that's what I am. I'm in charge. I make decisions. That's what I get paid to do, and not having, want to decide when my dog is going to go out to, out for a walk. It's very different, So I just think that's something that we
important to your dog.
It's important to my dog, but I think if you don't understand that and see the loss that's going to come with that, you may get blindsided.
Totally.
Yeah,
totally.
Yeah, that's great. I think it's helpful advice. Well, so I wanted to also shift to just you as a leader in general. You've had an opportunity, you think about professionally developing your team. You obviously think about the professional development of the entire student affairs profession. But I'm curious about how you learned to be a leader, because leadership is always infused in that professional development that you're working on. But I'm just like, is there a model of a person, or if there's someone who for you was like the stereotype of like, that's how you lead? Who first either gave you that vision, or is there something that you experienced or did that helped teach you about the kind of leader you wanted to be?
Yeah, that's a good question. Let me just start by saying I think about leadership as a craft, in the same way that like an actor or a musician thinks about their craft, or an artist, and they work on it all the time. So I think that you're never done being, it's a constant learning process. You make mistakes, you learn from those mistakes. I've had, it's kind of a trite answer, but I've had some really good people I've worked with, and then some awful people. And you learn different things from different folks along the way. But some lessons, I think, for me that I think have been really helpful. One of the biggest is there is an infinite amount of sunshine. And that as the CEO and the leader, the best thing I can do is to provide opportunities for other people to have that sunshine. I'm gonna get my own no matter what, right? So I see people kind of hoarding that sunshine, or that kind of control, or the credit, or whatever it might be. And I've come to a place where I don't feel threatened by other people's success and visibility. We all know Amelia Parnell, who's going to be the new CEO, but before she was the CEO, she was my VP for Research and Policy for the last 9 years. And Amelia has her own contacts, her own research, her own visibility, her own speeches. That enabled NASPA to be a better organization, instead of looking at that as somehow taking away from me. So so I think that I got taught that, because people did that for me in my career. I was allowed to have visibility, and to develop my own kind of voice. And I think that's probably the biggest thing that I have learned. I think the other thing that just watching people, I understood that when I became the NASPA president, I didn't know it before the first day. When I first took over, I suddenly understood that I was the voice of the student affairs profession. I hadn't really thought that through very well, actually. And I have this metaphor about the megaphone. Like, I got to my desk and there was a megaphone sitting on the desk, and I was going to have a choice about whether to exercise my voice and use that megaphone, or just sort of, sit on the side. I watched people, and how really successful leaders in higher ed and outside higher ed use their voice for good, to represent a position or people that didn't have a voice. Or, sometimes in my field, there's things that I can say that can't be said on a college campus. Look at the DEI, anti-DEI world that we're in. I'm going to speak out about that. I'm going to decry that as some of the worst legislation I've ever seen in higher education. And I can say that, but a vice president of student affairs at University of Texas Austin can't. No matter what their opinion might be. So I think that I learned that that was a responsibility that came with the job, and I thought that was, for me, was really really important. And then Freeman Rabowski I worked for Freeman back in the 90s, and I remember two things about Freeman when he was on campus. He would pick up pieces of trash when he was walking around campus. So without any fanfare. He would just stuff it in his pocket. See a wrapper like that. And the second thing he'd do is he would say hello to everybody. He never felt like he was so important that he had to be this and he would engage a student and say, what's your name? What's your major? What's your GPA? He would ask them questions about their academic performance and try to get at how they were doing. And then provide, support. I learned so much from watching that. Like two things that as a leader, you're never too important to do any job. So I'll crawl under a table, hook up wires, whatever the job might be. Now my staff don't want me to do that, but I think you have to be willing to do anything. Second thing, my profession is filled with young people. I mean, Gen Zs, young millennials. So, I engage every one of them. They have my email. I'll answer a phone call. I answer my own emails. Like, never get too impressed with yourself that you don't connect with the people that actually are the most important and the people who are doing the work. And I learned that from watching folks as well.
What, how purposeful has your career arc been, and what's the biggest surprise or the biggest, curveball that you couldn't have seen 40 years ago, maybe when you were starting down a road?
Well, I wanted to be a vice president of student affairs. That was my career objective. I master's, PhD. I was very intentional about creating a career that would move in that direction with lots of advice from folks. Work for an association, but associations don't do anything. That never occurred to me. And then once I understood the scope of associations, I never thought that I would have the opportunity or the privilege to be in this kind of role. This was a complete surprise to me. In fact, when I took this job back in '94, Liz Nuss at that time was the executive director, and she interviewed me. She had asked me to apply, and I said, I'm not really that interested. And then we kind of pushed, and we finally got around to the offer. And I said, look, 2 years, and I'm out, because I want to be back on a campus, because I love the vibrancy of a campus, all the excitement and the energy. What I didn't understand that I would love so much is the way that associations can be entrepreneurial and innovative, and almost like small for-profit companies in that way, without having to have shareholders or whatever. And then two, and Bridget, I know you love this too. I love the idea of tackling big issues and problems, and knowing that you can have some influence and guide an entire profession around that. And that motivates me every single day. I mean, what a unique opportunity to be in an industry that is, one of the most important things that we do in our world, right? Is provide an educational environment and changing the life trajectory of human beings. It's an enormously rewarding piece of work that I never would have thought. When you're a young person, you go to a conference, you don't think about the wheels and the opportunities that come around from some of that. So that 30 years ago, I was 37. That 37-year-old Kevin had no idea that this could be something you could do, and it would be this fulfilling. So
the arc would have just been,
I'd be a VP for student affairs,
but four of them or something. In other words, or whatever.
Exactly.
You would have.
I would have started off at a regional public, and the next thing you know, I'd be VP of student affairs at Ohio State or something like that. Yeah, right. And you know what? I'd be exhausted. Well, a good friend of mine is Pat Whiteley. Is the VP at University of Miami. She's been the VP there for, I'm going to say 28 years. And she and I had this conversation. I think it's interesting. In 2024 now, you can't be a VP of student affairs for 28 years, maybe not even 10 years anymore. The pressure, the demands, and that goes probably with the college presidents. So we're sort of seeing the tenure shrinking, right? So where you can do it as association leaders, because no one's calling me at 2 a.m. on a Saturday night, to talk to a parent whose child has died. So we have a privilege of doing this heavy work, but we're not on the front lines, and that allows a longer continuity of career in some way.
That's very great. So I want to also ask what, we asked for the advice you've gotten about retirement, but just separately. I'm just thinking about your career, navigating that change, having the impact that you've had. Who NASPA is now is a fundamentally different organization than it was when you first joined, right? And so part of that is also, and then shepherding higher ed through this really tumultuous last period. I'm just curious, what advice someone else gave you about your career or about leadership that has been something that you revisit most often?
Well, I think I kind of alluded to this. I think if you're going to work in this business, be intellectually curious. I mean, and understand that you don't know everything. I mean, have some humility about it. I mean, I think this is every day you can learn something, and about the business and about running the business that we do. I kind of alluded to this before. You've got to have a team of people that you can trust and can be alongside you. So building a strong team, whether you call it a kitchen cabinet or a bench or whatever you want to call it, hiring good people. In some ways, what do I do? What do I get paid to do? Make decisions. We talked about that already, and then hire really good people and retain them. But you do those two things. I mean, you're kind of pretty far along from being successful. I think those are important. And then you have to understand the budget. What's the book? The CEO only does three things. It's the vision, the people, and then but the money's the third thing. Like, you have to understand the way that the wheels run in these organizations, and how to keep them solvent and afloat. So that's not something that you could. My PhD is not in association management and running complex organizations. You got to learn that. So I read all the time. I'm constantly reading. I read all the McKinsey stuff. I read books on leadership. I read, budgeting and strategic budgeting, and because you have to have an understanding of that, and then learn from your colleagues. Like I mentioned, some of the association colleagues I learned from. I think that's obviously important as well.
Those are all very good piece of advice to share.
What, speaking of advice, at a certain stage of our career, probably particularly, we probably get asked a lot for our advice by younger people, and you've described people you've mentored. What are the pieces of advice that you tend to pass on the most to those who are earlier in their careers? Or
well, I think the first is the future of higher education, from my standpoint, is not one of specialists any longer. So we have built a infrastructure at universities that some people call silos, but they're very vertical, and that's just not sustainable in the next vision of higher ed with the finances that we see. And so what I tell people, young people, is the future is being a generalist, and being a generalist means having a wide set of skills. So use your early years to become as well-versed as possible in many aspects of if student affairs or other aspects of the institution. That will make you a more competitive employee going forward. And I think the luxury of specialization is probably a phase of higher ed that's coming to an end. We're not there yet, but you can see the signs of it. And so I think that's one piece. I think the second thing is, this is really pragmatic, but look, if you choose higher ed as a career, you're choosing a value-centered career over making a ton of money. Like this, if money is your most important thing, then you should go work for Google or Amazon or IBM or someplace else. You choose higher ed, you are making there's a sacrifice that comes with this work. You can make money eventually, but you're going to probably make less than your peers that maybe chose a different pathway. But you're also going to choose something that means something to you. And again, when very few opportunities in your life do you get to change the trajectory of an individual and their family and their kids. And think about the work that we do. Just think a first generation student who you have an impact on getting them to the finish line. That has multi-generational impact, right? So if that should motivate you, you should get joy from that and meaning from that. And that's a sacrifice. And know it going in. It's if you go into this field and say, "Hey, I should be making $150,000 as a hall director." Well, you knew that wasn't the case. Like we told you up front. Now, do we have issues around pay equity for young staff? Coupa HR has certainly exposed a lot of that, and Doug, you have exposed many of that with us with stories about how burned out and unhappy some of my workforce is. Having said that, we have to repair the workforce a little bit, but the basic premise is there. This is value-centered work, and it's a privilege to have the opportunity to do that. If you don't feel that way, then maybe it's the wrong profession for you.
Yeah, and I think you're connecting that and your point about being a generalist and being and about the budget, to me, I don't think you should be able to work in higher education unless you can take a course first on the history of higher ed finance.
Right.
Because if everyone took that, if everyone understood the history of it and exactly what those trade-offs look like, there would not be this fractioned, like just really divisive kind of sense that there are different factions. Instead, it would just be same team. We are literally all on the same team, and it would reduce some of that. And also we would be, I think, more thoughtful to our colleagues, and this resource scarcity, and it also aligns with your idea that there's plenty of sunshine, right? Like we've got to get from a scarcity mindset to a one of abundance.
But right. Like totally, I completely agree. But no one says this, and I'm not saying I have the answer to this, but when I read Inside Higher Ed every day and every other publications out there, what I conclude from that is that we are in the beginning of or the early stages of a higher ed recession, and because you see it everywhere. And if you understand that, then you think differently about the next 5 years, as opposed to, because if you know that resources are going to be heavily constrained and already are, and we'll be cutting programs. If you know that's the environment, wouldn't you think differently about how you would go about your own strategic planning for institution in the next 5 years, as opposed to what I sometimes see, which is a little bit of like, what problem, and it's clear, it's sitting out there. So I think that scarcity, scarcity can be an opportunity because it can provide the motivation to do some things that maybe you couldn't have done before.
Yeah. So our last question is about if there's a book about leadership has been most useful for you that you find yourself recommending more and more, or
am I stuck on one?
You can a couple. Bring them.
I just finished Hidden Potential, Adam Grant's book. I think it's awesome. Just talks about how people achieve great things. I really have enjoyed that. And not to, it's kind of inside baseball a little bit, but Marjorie Haas's book, Women in Higher Education, was excellent. And I thought, as a white male leader who works in a very feminine profession, I think it's been really, really instructive for me to help understand some, how people view women's leadership, and particularly in higher ed. And that was just an awesome book as well. So those are two that I read recently that have struck me.
Great. Those are good recommendations. No one's recommended those yet. And people are always writing in telling us how they use these recommendations for their own PD journey. So, well, this has been wonderful. Thank you so much for making time to share with us, especially at this unique moment in your career where you're probably soaking up a lot of lessons and kind of reflecting back.
It is a time of reflection. Yeah.
You have definitely set NASPA on a course to be the best that it's been, and it's in a strong position. And Amelia's going to be a fantastic leader for the next chapter, and you've done great work preparing her for that. So
thanks, Bridget.
I hope it feels as good as we think it should.
It does right now.
Yeah. All right.
We'll come back in 6 months.
Look at the news every day. It seems like a good time to step aside.
All right. Well, we wish you well, and thanks. To our audience. We'll see you next week. Thanks a lot for tuning in.